let's talk about that voice. The one in your head that gets loudest right when the lights go out. In this explainer, we're going to walk through some really solid, proven strategies to help you finally get a handle on those racing thoughts that keep you staring at the ceiling. You know the drill, right? You're completely exhausted. You crawl into bed, but your brain's on switch just feels stuck. It's that incredibly frustrating feeling when your body is begging for rest, but your mind is running a marathon. It just will not shut down. Researchers have a pretty powerful way of describing this feeling. They say, negative thoughts in the insomnia brain spread like wildfire. And that's such a perfect metaphor, isn't it? Once one little worry sparks, it can feel like your entire mind is just engulfed in flames, making sleep feel completely out of reach. So, how do we put out this fire? Well, we've got a clear path laid out for you. First, we're going to identify that voice in the dark. Then, we'll meet the insomnia brain to see what's really going on. After that, we dive into the good stuff, the actual tools, setting aside a time and place for worry, putting thoughts on trial, and finally, rewiring your nightly narrative. All right, let's jump in. Section 1, the voice in the dark. This is all about that internal monologue, the one filled with all the what-ifs and the endless replays of your day. It's basically the narrator of our nighttime anxiety. And that voice performs on a very specific kind of stage, which brings us right to Section 2, the insomnia brain. This isn't some physical change in your brain. It's a specific pattern of thinking that kind of takes over when you can't sleep. So let's break down what it is and why it happens. Okay, this is really the key thing to get. The insomnia brain is just a state of mind. It's not permanent. It's a way of thinking that gets super noisy and laser-focused on all the bad things that are going to happen because you're not sleeping. And the best part? Because it's a thinking habit, it's a habit you can absolutely change. And I just want to be clear, all these ideas we're talking about, they come from a solid foundation. They're based on proven cognitive strategies for managing sleep issues. So this isn't just folk wisdom. This is backed by years of research and clinical practice. So how do you know if your insomnia brain has kind of taken over? Well, there are a few telltale signs. Your thinking style at night is totally different from how you are during the day. Your brain gets incredibly noisy with worry. And here's the big one. Your bed itself can become a trigger for anxiety. Over time, this whole thing creates an unwanted habit of worrying the second your head hits the pillow. Okay, enough theory. Let's get practical. Section 3, a time and place for worry. Our first technique is called Constructive Worry, and it's a surprisingly powerful way to take back control. And this is the core idea, which might sound a little weird at first. The goal isn't to magically stop worrying. I mean, who can do that? The goal is to schedule it. You give your worries their own appointment so they don't crash your bedtime. So how does it actually work? It's a super simple process. First, find about 15 minutes in the early evening, not right before bed. Get a piece of paper and in one column, write down all your concerns. Then, and this is key, in a second column, write down just the very next step you can take. Not the whole solution, just the next little step. Then, fold it up, put it away. Later, if a worry pops up in bed, you can just tell yourself, nope, already dealt with you, I've got a plan. And this is the beautiful result. You go from this swirl of anxiety, this blank page of worry, to a concrete plan of action. You're literally taking the worries out of your head and trapping them on paper. It's an amazing way to quiet that internal noise. Okay, let's move on to our next tool. Section 4, putting thoughts on trial. This technique is called the thought record, and it's all about actively challenging those automatic negative thoughts that pop into your head. So here's what a finished one looks like. The whole point is to get you from that initial gut punch of a negative thought to a much more balanced, realistic perspective. It helps you pull apart those automatic thoughts and get back in touch with reality. Let's just boil this down, okay? On the left, you've got that classic unhelpful thought. I'm never going to get through today. I'm going to mess everything up. That's the insomnia brain talking loud and clear. But after you put it on trial, you land on a new, balanced thought, like the one on the right. Okay, I don't feel my best, but I've had a good night's sleep and still made mistakes. I can get through this. See the difference? It's not about toxic positivity. It's about being realistic. So how do you get there? You become a detective. You weigh the evidence. See, the insomnia brain only looks at the evidence for the negative thought, like, I'm starting to feel less like doing things. The thought record forces you to also find evidence against it. For instance, you know what? I always seem to have an okay day, even with my insomnia. Just looking at both sides, that's what breaks the thought's power. All right, our final section, rewiring your nightly narrative. Now that we have these couple of tools in our belt, let's use them to tackle some of the most common, unhelpful thinking patterns that show up when we can't sleep. Do any of these sound familiar? You've got all or none thinking, right? Like saying, I didn't sleep at all, when you probably did, even if it was broken. Then there's catastrophizing, where one bad night of sleep suddenly leads to you getting fired. There's the self-fulfilling prophecy. You believe you'll have a terrible day, and well, you kind of make it happen. And of course, mind reading, assuming you know for a fact that everyone can tell how tired you are. Just being able to name these is a huge first step.
I want to zoom in on one of these for a second because it is so common and so powerful. Catastrophizing. This is that mental game of following a fear all the way down the rabbit hole to its most extreme and usually most illogical conclusion.
So picture a conversation with a therapist. The therapist asks, okay, so you're worried you'll be useless at work. What would that mean? And the patient, whose insomnia brain is in high gear, says, well, I could get into trouble. But the therapist doesn't stop there. They push a little more, using a technique called the downward arrow. They'll ask, okay, and then what? What's the absolute worst case scenario? And the patient follows that chain of fear. Well, I'd get fired, I guess. And this is where it leads. The patient finally gets to the ultimate fear. And then I can't pay my bills, and then I'm homeless. See what happened? In the dead of night, the insomnia brain made a direct connection between one bad night of sleep and being homeless. So what's the point of doing this? It's simple, really. By exposing that entire chain of thought, by saying it out loud or writing it down, you rob the fear of its power. You can actually see how many unlikely leaps in logic you had to make. You see the caps, and you realize you're not on some runaway train to disaster. You regain perspective. And really, that brings us to the final, most important question. All of these techniques, they're about one thing: taking back control of your inner monologue. The thoughts are probably going to come, so the real question isn't whether you'll have thoughts tonight, it's what story will you choose to tell yourself.